Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting for Monday, September 11th, 2017. My name is Mark Farrell. I will be chairing this committee. I am joined by our committee vice chair, Supervisor Aaron Peskin, as well as Supervisor Katie Tang. Would like to thank Jim Smith and Ben English from SF Gov TV for covering the meeting today, as well as Erica Major, the clerk of our committee. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the September 19th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. And for members of the public, it doesn't seem like we might have the issue right now, but in case there is later on, our Northlight Corridor, Northlight Court is available for overflow. Again, don't have that issue at the moment, but it's always good to be prepared. With that, Madam Clerk, we're going to go to the agenda. Could we call item number 4 out first, please?
Yes. Item number 4 is a hearing on the Planning Department's Housing Balance Report number 5, dated May 12, 2017.
Thank you very much. So, colleagues, we have been asked to continue this item to the call of the chair. So, to get it off our agenda, I thought we'd take this first. So, before we do that, is there any public comment on item number 4? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, could I have a motion to continue item number 4 to the call of the chair?
So moved.
Motion by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. Okay, with that, Madam Clerk, could you go back to item number 1, please?
Yes. Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to support legacy businesses, expand the definition of historic buildings, and impose additional requirements in the Broadway Neighborhood Commercial District and the North Beach Special Use District, and prohibit certain uses in the North Beach Special Use District and affirming appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you. So, colleagues, this item was sponsored by Supervisor Peskin, so I will turn it over to you, Supervisor.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and thank you for scheduling this item today, which has been the subject of many months, if not years, of discussion in North Beach, which has a very robust, renowned commercial district. I want to start by thanking the many cooks in the kitchen, starting with the North Beach Business Association, as well as adjoining neighborhood organizations, including the Telegraph Hill Dwellers, many legacy business owners, particularly Dan Macchiarini of Macchiarini Designs, Tom Radulovich and Livable Cities, as well as Planning Department staff Diego Sanchez, who's here today, Aaron Starr, and Tim Fry for their ongoing work with our office and the community on these amendments. I also want to acknowledge my staff, Lee Hepner, who has brought this to the Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission and sought their input, and want to thank the members of the Planning Commission who recommended our 4th draft of this legislation to this body without modification. So thank you to those members of the Planning Commission. It was a unanimous vote. I think there were 1 or 2 members who were absent the day that it was heard. And what this community-driven planning process is really about is tweaking North Beach's neighborhood controls to do what it has arguably done very well since the 1980s, which is to make sure that the ground floor retail spaces in the neighborhood are robust and vibrant. North Beach was amongst the first neighborhoods, this is decades ago, getting on to 40 years ago, that realized that having ground floor financial institutions was not the best way to treat our ground floor areas. And to that end, this is long before my time in government. I was probably in high school or college at the time. They limited the number of banks in North Beach. And there's been many improvements along the way. But right now, the amendments that are before you ensure active commercial use on the ground floor of buildings, eliminate the reduction of ground story retail or commercial space, limit lot sizes to reduce speculation in the neighborhood that would drive up both residential and commercial rents, protects historic resources and legacy businesses, as well as further long-term environmental and Vision Zero pedestrian safety goals by reducing off-street parking requirements for new developments, which is consistent with the direction the city has been moving toward, and we're happy to be the standard bearer for this change. There are provisions that activate our alleyways by reducing parking garage allowances on narrow pedestrian alleys. And finally, and this is going to be the bulk of what I want to talk to you about, colleagues, there was some clarification of the formula retail ordinance that my former colleague Matt Gonzalez sponsored over a decade ago. And recently, actually just starting on Friday, my office has been made aware of legitimate concerns from our Department of Public Health and various nonprofit health service providers about the effect of extending formula retail controls to include health services. This is really an attempt to address the emergence citywide and regionally and nationally of the phenomenon of urgent care facilities that are popping up all over the city, and this particular portion of the legislation would apply citywide. I had a novel concept over the weekend, which was that we could keep that matter in committee, and insofar as the city is in the process of developing a health services master plan, we might want to defer the conversation and do it as part of that master planning conversation in conjunction with the Department of Public Health. And so my simple idea was today to delete under that formula retail provision the words health services. But I have been informed by our counsel, Mr. Givner, that it may be a little more complicated than that, and that the city attorney who is in charge of that is not here today. So I was going to suggest, after we hear from planning and after we hear from the public, that there are a couple of ways to do that, but it is my intent to put that in the parking lot, continue public policy conversations around the health services definition in formula retail, which has been the sticking point over the last 96 hours, albeit this legislation was introduced months ago and has been to the Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission, but I'm not whining about that. I am glad that people realize that they have concerns about that and want to address those. So to that end, I will, after we hear from the department and from the public, make some suggestions about how we can technically deal with that issue in today and next Tuesday.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. So, Supervisor, do you have some departments that you wanted to call up?
From staff, we have Diego Sanchez from the Department of City Planning, or City Planning as they're now called, and I know that there are some number of folks who were involved in the last year of the community process to draft this legislation who may want to testify on behalf of the public, but I'd start with Mr. Sanchez.
Afternoon, Supervisor. As with planning staff, as mentioned, this ordinance went before both Planning Commission and Historic Preservation Commission, the HPC. In both cases, the respective commissions were in support of the ordinance. At the July 19th HPC hearing, the Commission decided to deliberate and consider only the issues of legacy business controls and Planning Department staff historic preservation review. There was ample discussion over these two topics. There was concern of the possible punitive nature of the legacy business controls as proposed in the ordinance and a desire to stem any negative impacts to subsequent commercial tenants. There's also a question over the clarity and benefit of the proposed language on historic preservation review. In the end, the HPC moved unanimously to adopt a resolution to recommend the proposed ordinance with modifications. The HPC proposed the following modifications. One was to maintain the existing historic preservation review procedures for buildings in the North Beach SUD and the Broadway NCD, and they also concurred with the list of historic resources that are identified for review. And the second modification was for the proposed legacy business controls in the North Beach SUD. Their modifications were threefold. One, to exempt properties that have been vacant or otherwise removed from the legacy business registry from the conditional use authorization requirement for uses occupying a space formerly occupied by a legacy business. The second one was to add conditional use findings for the Planning Commission to consider when reviewing an application proposing to occupy a space formerly occupied by a legacy business. And the third proposed modification was to have the Supervisor's Office provide additional clarity regarding treatment of legacy businesses in the case of vacancies where businesses have left on their own accord. Supervisors, at the July 20th Planning Commission hearing, the Commission thought that overall, all the proposed changes in the ordinance made sense. The neighborhood commercial districts in this city are all unique, and this ordinance works to maintain that condition. There was some discussion over the proposed changes to the formula retail controls and to health service uses, but in the end, the Planning Commission voted to favorably recommend the ordinance as proposed without modification. This concludes my presentation, and I am available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any questions at this time? Okay. Supervisor Peskin, anybody else you wanted to bring up?
I'd like to open it up to public comment and then suggest how we might proceed.
Okay, with that, we'll open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item 1? You know what, sorry, we have our Department of Public Health here first. Why don't we take our staff member?
Thank you
Colleen,
very much.
please.
Colleen Chavla, Deputy Director for the Department of Public Health. I want to thank Supervisor Peskin's office for being receptive to hearing our concerns about the potential unintended consequences of extending formula retail restrictions to all of our healthcare partners. I think, as the supervisor mentioned, the Healthcare Services Master Plan is a tool that we already have in place to assess the healthcare needs of our city, and in fact, the last version of the master plan particularly identified vulnerable populations within San Francisco as being in high need, and so the restrictions on the Department of Public Health as well as our safety net partners were of particular concern to us. So I appreciate the supervisor's willingness to take our concerns into consideration and address them in a future hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment? Please come forward. Everyone will have 2 minutes.
Hi, Lauren Kahn with Health Rate 360, a member of the San Francisco Community Clinic Consortium. Just want to echo the Department of Public Health's remarks and thank Supervisor Peskin for the understanding that this will disproportionately impact community safety net healthcare providers' ability to actually serve the needs of San Franciscans. So we're willing to provide lots of reasons why it's important to exempt nonprofit healthcare providers, but it seems like you understand them, so we just want to say thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Dee Dee Workman. I'm representing the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. I want to first of all thank Supervisor Peskin for your willingness to delete health services from this ordinance. I think that was one of our major concerns about it, was that the expansion of the application of formula retail controls to other uses that would include health services would have been really problematic. But we would like to request that this item be continued not just for the health services portion of it, but for the ordinance in its entirety. We think that would be really helpful. We have members who, while I understand you've been working on this maybe specific to North Beach, I think that the changes to the formula retail control citywide took some people by surprise. And we would love to be able to work on this together a little bit more. So while we appreciate your willingness to deal with the health service aspect, again, which was really important to us also, we would appreciate if this item was continued. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Yes, my name is Stan Hayes. I'm the immediate past president of the Telegraph Hill Dwellers, and I'm the co-chair of its Planning and Zoning Committee. And I'm here today on behalf of THD to support this legislation as it's been proposed by Supervisor Peskin. This is trailing legislation to the North Beach and Telegraph Hill portion of the Planning Department's Article 7 omnibus reorganization. We believe that the amendments that are proposed by the supervisor further protect the historic character and integrity of our residential and commercial districts, including preserving the contributions of legacy businesses. We believe these amendments will help preserve the fine-grained nature of North Beach neighborhoods and businesses, ensure street activating commercial uses on the ground floor throughout the district, and an especially important thing to us, that it will clarify, and I hope this process that may be continued today, but as it unfolds, that there'll be clarification of the formula retail protections, especially including further protection against the expansion of already existing formula retail businesses in a district where new such uses are banned. We believe the amendments will increase our commitment to pedestrian safety in public transit. They'll ensure enhanced review by preservation staff of projects that could alter historically sensitive buildings, and that it will limit the loss of residential and ground floor commercial spaces. So, in sum, we urge you to support this legislation. It confirms existing conditions in North Beach that have produced a renowned, as Supervisor Peskin said, unique and successful commercial and pedestrian-friendly environment. And thank you, Supervisor Peskin. This really reflects the way it's supposed to work, with neighborhood and business leaders joining with you to produce this. Thank you very much. Please support the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Milo Traus from the San Francisco YIMBY Party. I want to start out by commending the parking changes. That's very good. We don't need as many cars on the roads. But I want to point out the expanding the definition of historic buildings. We should be very careful about that, given the housing climate. Historical preservation is often used as a tool to block building more housing, and that is the last thing we need. A lot of the time we hear where we have discussions about housing that's proposed and the mission, and the neighbors there are, skeptical and resistant. And honestly, I have some sympathy for that position, because coming from a group that's historically disempowered, why should they trust that changes in their neighborhood will be good and benefit them? But in this instance, we have a neighborhood, a part of the city, that historically has had all the privilege in the world. And now this particular aspect of this proposed legislation could double down in empowering this group that will end up really penalizing or poorer folks with less resources are going to have to bear the brunt. So please remove especially that part about historical preservation, because I think it'll make it harder to add housing and disproportionately hurt people with less resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Laura Clark, YIMBY Action. I think that there's a couple things that add up to making this very, anti-housing legislation. I love the idea of doing everything we can to help first-story retail. I love the idea of making sure that we're building things less car-centric. Those are great ambitions. But if we make basically all of D3 landmark and add historical review to everything basically over 40 feet, which is what I understand this to be, if we make it so that anything with 250 square feet or larger has a conditional use and preventing larger lot development, we're basically saying that we're not going to do any home SF projects in District 3 for the foreseeable future, as far as I can see it. I would love for the department to create a report that would say, are we giving up all potential home SF lots in District 3 by adopting this legislation? This seems to me like it is doubling down on allowing Telegraph Hill and North Beach to not do their fair share of housing development. Every district needs to take on some of the burden of building housing. And I think that this sets a really dangerous precedent for expanding historic in wealthier neighborhoods. I think that if we're going to be doing historic preservation, we should be very careful about that. And we should make sure that we are deliberately designating individual historically important things, not designating basically an entire district a landmark historic place. I also think that there are concerns about making sure that we are going to do everything we can to get first-story retail. I don't think necessarily that making sure that you can't have a large developer on a big plot. It might be a good idea to look into doing legislation that would require smaller first-story retail to be built, even when someone builds a large project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Apologize for casual attire here today. A lot of the same red flags were kind of raised by us, and I hate showing up to the hospital well after the baby has been born. But but this is obviously for us going to be about housing. I remember one time Planning Commissioner Johnson said in a meeting that we need to make sure that we were always protecting things that were historic and not just old. And I think sometimes that becomes a pretty gray line in this city. As Laura mentioned earlier, this really does become concerning with us, specifically related to carve-outs for Home San Francisco. I know Supervisor Farrell's district is going to see the first Home SF project at the Planning Commission, I believe, on September 28th, the Lucky Penny site, which was a on-the-way home stop for me after drinks in North Beach more than once, is going to go from 21 units to 121 units, and it's such a great example of why we fought so hard and got that legislation to such a good point that we got unanimous approval in this chamber earlier this year. So we just don't want to see any steps backwards on that. Firmly do believe that every neighborhood certainly does need to be adding new units going forward, and I understand the density in North Beach is already as high as any other neighborhood in the entire city, and that actually makes it honestly a little bit more appeasing because the neighbors know that density is a good thing there. We have some of those battles on the western side of the city, and we look forward to educating neighbors about the benefits of density and quality communities, but we just don't want to lose out on an opportunity here. So again, we would really like to understand how this will impact housing production in the district. As we know, we had one of the best years of housing production in 2016. According to the planning department, I got an email last week, there was a net 5,000 new units onto the market last year. Not shocking to us, we saw decreased rent prices and decreased evictions, so we want to make sure we continue that momentum and keep building housing going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I don't have time to sing, and later on maybe I might render a song, but I just want to praise Supervisor Peskin for all this legislating he's doing here, because I know your constituents in your district are really proud of what you're doing. And I'm not going to say nothing bad about Queen Bee. I know she's listening, but I want her to listen to what I'm getting ready to say in between the lines. And also this mayor. I call him a coward. He was just in the hallway. I said, Ace, and he started running, and security rushed him in the backstage there. What the hell is this city coming to? My name is Ace. I'm on the case. But stick to the script, Ace. In parallel, what you're doing in your district, it needs to be done in our district. We need someone that will look out for our district and for the future of the district and not of their individual selves. Read between the lines. The NCD was put in by London Breed in our district. We don't have no say-so what goes on. The CAC, the CBD, and all the rest of those characters pop up. Perpetrators been in our community for years, and there's results of it now, and you're going to talk about it in the next couple of items, is the Fillmore, in which I title it, and anybody want to interview me, The Fill No More. But anyway, we're here right now. I'm here congratulating district that you're in, Peskin, because I know they're congratulating you what you're doing. You're doing a wonderful job. You're historical. You came back to the supervisor, and I don't know if there's any other supervisors that came back after their 4 years absence, but I do see you sitting up there in the future as the president running things. But right now, I'm here, Ace, on the case, trying to tell y'all I'm here, and I'm going to be on the case. And Ed Lee, they're on their way out, so I'm not worried about that administration. I've been here for 5 administrations. Ed Lee, you know me, and I got a song for you.
Okay. Anybody else wish to comment on item number 1? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Okay. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. And before I make my proposal as to how to deal with the formula retail matter, let me just address a couple of informational items. First of all, let me be abundantly clear to anybody who has read this legislation. It in no way applies to all of the 3rd Supervisorial District, which is largely bordered to the west by Van Ness Avenue and to the south by Market and Post Street and Geary at various points. This applies to a postage stamp neighborhood commercial district and adjoining special use district that we could actually map out geographically, but I would be surprised if it's more than 2% of the entire geographical area that encompasses District 3. So I'd like to correct that misconception for the record. I'd also like to say this is actually not a piece of housing legislation. It is a piece of commercial regulation relative to a neighborhood commercial district with some dealing with parking. It does have a provision with regard to historic buildings, and specifically really codifies what the planning department already does and requires the planning department to consult materials available through the California Historical Resources Information System and inventory to determine eligibility. In the North Beach SUDs, historic buildings are also includes buildings and districts identified by adopted surveys that the City and County of San Francisco has adopted, and for such buildings requires that planning department staff review any proposed alterations and determine that they comply with the standards for treatment of historic properties. This is what already happens in San Francisco, so I would like to correct any misconceptions about that. As it relates to the issue of formula retail use, let me say, and respectfully so, that I am surprised that this took the Chamber of Commerce by surprise. It has been the subject of publicly noticed hearings at the Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission. It was introduced many, many months ago. It has been revised 4 times. That is why this is the 4th legislative version before us. Having said that, here is what I would like to propose, and that is that I duplicate the file, that in the version that I would like to send forward to the full board with recommendation, that we delete the changes to section 303.1, formula retail uses, and keep that in committee. So that is specifically what I believe, and I can elucidate you with a little bit of history around this, is the including but not limited to definition that is set forth on page 9, lines 8 through 14. So I would strike all of section 303.1, including that language, keep that here and continue it to the call of the chair in the duplicated file, and we can have a robust conversation not just about health services, but about the other definitions. By way of elucidating a little bit of history, it is my belief that the plain reading of the current language of the definition of formula retail always included these different definitions. The zoning administrator has had a different interpretation for many years. In discussing this with the zoning administrator, my office said to Mr. Sanchez, we believe that the code is clear that these uses are already formula retail. I think, and I don't want to put words in Mr. Sanchez's mouth, he understood how it could be read that way, but that is not indeed how it has been interpreted by planning. And so this was an attempt to clarify what I think is already clear in the code. Having said that, why don't we continue that portion of this conversation? And so, colleagues, I guess I don't need a second to duplicate the file. So I would like to duplicate the file, and I would like to take the, I don't care whether it's the original file or the duplicated file, why don't we say the duplicated file, and remove section 303.1 and forward the balance of the file to the full board with recommendation, and then continue the duplicated or the original file, whichever one, here in committee, continue that to the call of the chair, and I will engage Ms. Workman and the Department of Public Health and the Hospital Council, and we will talk about health service definitions, conditional use, as well as all of the other definitions implicated herein.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Peskin. And just to clarify from our city attorney, we're okay with that from a legal perspective?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any questions or comment? Otherwise, we have a motion by Supervisor Peskin, second. Okay, we have are we clear on the motion as well?
Yes, to clarify, the first motion is to delete section 303.1 from the duplicated file and move it forward to the full board for September 19th. And the second is to keep the original file in committee and continue it to the call of the chair.
You got it. Okay. Motion then Supervisor Peskin, and we can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, would you call item number 2, please?
Yes, item number 2 is an ordinance amending Chapter 11D of the Building Code on mandatory disability access improvements, extending time for compliance and report to the Board of Supervisors, and directing the clerk of the board to forward the legislation to the California Building Standards Commission upon final passage.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. This item was sponsored by Supervisor Tang. Supervisor, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So in May 22nd of 2016, there was a law that took effect here in the city, and it was through extensive work with Department of Building Inspection, Planning, Department of Public Works, and our Mayor's Office on Disability, and thanks to the late and great Carla Johnson for helping us with this. We had come up with, I think, the country's most expansive legislation regarding accessibility requirements for places of public accommodation. And so today the legislation is to request that we extend the timeline, which you will see on page 3 of the legislation, for the 3 different requirements that we have asked of buildings. It is estimated that about 25,000 properties would be covered by the ordinance, and we really need additional time to have a Department of Building Inspection, Public Works, and Planning, and so forth to develop design guidelines, conduct further outreach so that we can make this program the most successful it can possibly be. So the timeline, again, you'll see the changes on page 3 of the legislation. For example, the 3 different requirements are submitting a compliance checklist. All of those will be extended by about 12 months. Filing applications for building permits would be extended by a couple months as well. And then actually obtaining the required building permits would be extended by several months. So that's the ordinance in a nutshell, and I hope that colleagues, you'll support us as we try to, again, make this a really successful program.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Tang. Seeing no questions, we will open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 2? Seeing none, public comment is closed.
All right, so I'll make a motion then to send forth item 2 to the full board with positive recommendation.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang, and we can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, would you go to item number 3, please?
Yes, item number 3 is an ordinance amending the subdivision code to allow subdivision map applicants to apply for and obtain final or parcel transfer subdivision maps that are for conveyancy and or financing purposes only.
Okay, thank you very much. We have DPW here to speak on this item.
Yes, Javier Rivera from Public Works. On occasion, it's necessary to create maps that are exclusively used for conveyance and or financing purposes. This could be accomplished with the transfer map. Basically, no development rights are granted through these maps. It's only used for financing or conveyance. Currently, transfer maps are permitted in the codes for Mission Bay, Candlestick Point, and Treasure Island. This legislation will modify the San Francisco Subdivision Code to allow the transfer maps for the city throughout as a whole. If you have any questions concerning the legislation or transfer maps, I'm happy to try and answer them for you.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor?
At the risk of this going the unintended way that the encroachment legislation went, which I'm going to send back to committee tomorrow at the full board. I know a little bit about the California Subdivision Map Act, and I have been a student of our local Subdivision Map Act here in San Francisco. I have so many questions about this, and I mean, we can do it here. I've never been contacted by Public Works about this. I saw it on Friday when I cracked the agenda. I have a lot of questions. I would prefer to continue this and have those conversations offline before I start making amendments and doing things that next thing I know, I'm going to get a call from Ed Lee and, Mohammed Nuru going like, what are you doing? So that would be my suggestion, because I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I think I understand why we wanted that for these large-scale projects. I'm not sure what the public interest is in making this a citywide right, if you will, or ability. The attorney who drafted this, who I would love to speak to, who actually drafted the encroachment legislation, is gone for the next year. So I can't call Mr. Malamet and ask him the questions I would have asked him over this last weekend. But I would respectfully say that we continue this either a couple of weeks or whatever until we can have those conversations. I've read this scant 2-page piece of legislation 3 times, and I frankly can't make head or tail out of it.
Sure.
So
I mean,
let me
that's
suggest something.
acceptable to us. We could certainly include the county surveyor, Bruce Storrs, in your conversations if you have that many. I believe that's best.
I have great respect for Mr. Storrs.
Okay.
So unless there's any extreme urgency we don't know about, I think that'll probably be the best approach here. Make sure we have all the information we need.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we'll plan to continue this subject to public comment. So why don't we just open this up to public comment right now? Item number 3. Anybody wish to comment?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody, listen, I get up a chance to speak anytime there's public comment because, you know, the history shows, it may not show, but I am responsible for the San Francisco Government Channel. And I don't expect y'all to give me any credit for that because I don't need your credit. I'd rather have cash. Anyway, the bottom line is the DPW, and I know it's unrelated, but I guess I could get up here and speak public comment. I could do that. There's big problems with DPW. And about this map you're talking about, let me stay on track. I don't know, does it include the Western Addition, Fillmore, or the A2 area, however you want to call that little 5th district? Well, we are left like we have never been there. We're in no planning. We're not in the OCII. We're not in the OEWD. It's almost like we had disappeared from the San Francisco maps. I'm not sure if that's sure, but I'll wait. But Muhammad, read between the lines. And Ed Lee, read between the lines. My name is Ace. I'm on the case. And anything that pertains to the African American and A2 area, I'm going to be up here, whether it has something to do with it, I'll make it parallel to what's happening. After a while, you're going to get tired of looking at ACE because I can't get in and talk to the mayor and I can't get in and talk to my district manager. My district supervisor. But anyway, politics here in the city needs to be examined. I know this is the culture of the pay to play and so corrupt. I think the whole city needs to be examined. All the department heads, what the hell are they doing? Particularly about the A2, the Fillmore, however you want to call it. My name is Ace, damn it, and I'm still on the case.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to comment on item number 3? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Colleagues and Supervisor Peskin, do you want to make a motion to continue this item to the call of the chair?
So moved.
Motion by Supervisor Peskin. We can take.
And I'll endeavor to understand this and ask all those questions of staff and Mr. Storrs as quickly as possible.
And we can take that motion without objection. All right, Madam Clerk, what do you call item 5?
Yes, item number 5 is a resolution urging the Recreation and Parks Commission to remove the name of Justin Herman from the plaza located at the intersection of the Embarcadero and Market Street.
Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. This item again sponsored by Supervisor Peskin. We'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Chair Farrell and Supervisor Tang. This issue has been kicking around for a long, long time, arguably since 1972, but really is part of a painful portion of the city's history. And I want to start by saying that there's a lot in this name, and it's more than about a particular person named Justin Herman. And so I want to start by saying that it's really a name that is symbolic of a remarkably unfortunate period in San Francisco's history that led to massive displacement of thousands of people. The previous speaker just referred to that area that is a letter and a number, the A2. But it's much more than about Justin Herman. It's about the entire political dynamic locally, and this was happening all over America. Mr. Herman served as the head of the redevelopment agency from 1959 to 1971 under 3 mayors who greenlighted all of the quote-unquote removal of urban blight, commonly known as redevelopment. I mean, that was Mayor Christopher, Mayor Shelley, and Mayor Alioto. It was many boards of supervisors that preceded us. I actually asked my intern this morning to give me a name of all of the presidents of the Board of Supervisors in that 12-year period, and they are Francis McCarthy, Harold Dobbs, Jack Ertola, Peter Tamaris, Joseph Tinney, Charles Ertola, and even Dianne Feinstein in 1971. So I also did some historical reading and research that really shows that the man, Justin Herman, in large part due to the incredible amount of community activism, also changed over time. He was not a simple person, and there was nuance there. I actually I had the honor of knowing the late, great Thomas Fleming, who was who ran one of San Francisco's great newspapers, the Sun Reporter, who early on in Mr. Herman's tenure, and I quote, if I can find the quote, referred to him as the arch villain in the black depopulation of the city. But years later, in 1971, a Sun reported editorial described how, quote, in the last few years, he, being Justin Herman, showed profound dedication to racial minority participation in redevelopment. Approximately 3 years ago, he, Herman, changed his approach from doing things for to doing things with racial minorities and let community-based controversy find its common level before initiating the final decision-making process. So I wanted to put all of that on the record. None of that changes the shameful activities that the entire city undertook in those years that we are still dealing with today. That is the subject of public policy and legislative actions that we undertake relative to neighborhood preference, to all sorts of things. It still permeates everything that we do relative to how we treat tenants and displacement and relocation. It had a profound effect, and I think the city, in many ways, learned and evolved because of it. All of that notwithstanding, colleagues, and I want to thank all of the members of the board, President Breed, Supervisor Kim, Supervisor Cohen, Supervisor Ronan, Supervisor Fewer, Supervisor Yee, Supervisor Sheehy, Supervisor Farrell, Supervisor Safai, and Supervisor Tang. I believe that is every single member of the board for co-sponsoring this resolution urging the Recreation and Parks Commission to remove the name of Justin Herman from the plaza located at the intersection of the Embarcadero and Market Street. I also want to add that I am not the first supervisor or member of the public who has been thinking about this. President Breed actually got the legislative and budget analysts to assess the costs of what it would cost to change the name some years ago in 2014. The answer is $5,200, which I think is a small price. And there have been many proposals about what deserving individual should go on that grand entrance to our major boulevard at the foot of Market Street. And I think that those conversations and petitions, all incredibly well-meaning, have stymied what, interestingly enough, my then colleague 17 years ago, Chris Daly, tried to do, which was to remove the name. And I don't think we're going to ever get the conversation going about what rightful, righteous person's name should be affixed to that plaza. So this is really a interim piece, a step, which urges the Recreation Parks Commission to remove the name pending an ongoing discussion as to what honored individual should be reflected that reflects the values of equity and inclusion that is San Francisco, and meanwhile that the plaza be known as simply the Embarcadero Plaza until a suitable honoree has been agreed upon, however that process should evolve. And so with that, colleagues, I really want to thank both of you as well as the other members of the board for taking this step that is now, I mean, this happened when I was a little kid, and now I won't tell you my age, but I'm past a half a century, and it's high time that San Francisco acknowledge this. And it's not, there are many people who are still around who knew Mr. Herman. I've gotten, I have to say, very interesting, if you're a historian, emails from former deputy directors like Art Evans, A.F. Evans, who worked with him, from family members. And so I just want to say to all of them that I understand that this is a very nuanced and painful issue for everybody involved, but it's high time that San Francisco not have that name, which symbolizes that very unfortunate period of time for which I, as a city official, want to say a half a century after the fact that we're very sorry for. So for that, that concludes my comments, Chair Farrell and Supervisor Tang.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Okay, seeing no other comments, we will open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 5? If you do, please come on up. Everyone will have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Thompson. I'm actually heading the committee for the plaza to be named David Johnson Plaza. I think Supervisor Peskin has already given most of the comments that I was going to make about the other name, but I would like to say something about David Johnson. After serving in World War II, he's actually is a photographer. He's here today. I'm going to introduce him after I finish speaking. He worked on the Ansel Adams as a photographer and went into the redevelopment of the Fillmore when it was taking place before that name came up, and they started the redevelopment. And so he actually photographed most of the pictures, and he has history reflecting that. He also did other work that I would like to read to you throughout the city of San Francisco, other than his photography, which is now being shown at Maiden Lane. You can go there today and actually look at Maiden Lane. His work is there on Maiden Lane in the kiosk there. Mr. Johnson, in 1970, was appointed by Mayor Aliato as a citizen commission for the Haight-Ashbury. He lived in the Haight-Ashbury in 1970 while employed at UCSF, and one of the founders of the Black Caucus, which actually brought a lot of our African Americans and people of color into the university because they were not hiring African American and people of colors at the University of California in San Francisco. He actually was part of that program that actually brought in the affirmative action agenda to get more African Americans and Chinese Americans and Hispanic Americans into the university. But I would pass out these to you. I think most of you have them. Please read his history. And Mr. Johnson, you would stand. I would like to, he's 91 years old. If you can come and just say hello. Thank you for having us today. And that name is David Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Chambers, Mr. Johnson. Next speaker, please.
Good for 91. I told him whatever jeans he got or whatever jeans he wearing, I want a pair of those. If you're looking at 91 like that, man, you looking good. The question I have now, I want to thank you, Peskin, and all the board of supervisors. What's going down in this town? The black population is going down. But when the benefits come, we might not be nowhere around. I'll go on, but I'm going to stop right there because this is so very serious. I got a song about it. It needs to be enshrined into what we're talking about here. But look at me, this is what, 1, 2, 3 of us, African-American, blacks, however you want to call us, just 3 of us here on this very, very historical moment. So whoever's reporting on it, I just came from London's office. He said she was going to be here. I don't see her. And that is so hurting to me. I don't see Cohen here, Supervisor Peskin. I don't see them here. That's why I say, between the lines, why ain't they here? Why is it nobody from our community? Because we are considered obsolete. But see, the thing about it, Ace is here. I've been here, Peskin, I'm 63. And I know the history of the Fillmore. I'm talking about the field no more, yeah. You know I'm talking about the field no more. So, I got some songs to go here, but this is so serious. And the blacks should be here because they should be curious about what is in store for their legacy for the generations to come. I'm appalled. I'm appalled of our so-called leaders and our elected officials that are African and black and Negro. They're not here either. My God, but this is Ace. I'm on the case. I'm here. There he is. I'd say there's only 3 of us here. I'm here. I know you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ace. Anybody else wish to comment on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor and Mr. Peskin. I'm Art Evans, and I appreciate very much their, I would say, extremely sensitive comments. I'm here to try to ask for a little bit more input from the public. I realize that you have given a great deal of attention and thought, and maybe many others as well. Justin was a very complicated, actually very interesting person. I've sent letters to all of the supervisors. They're quite lengthy, and I'm not going to be able to go through them, nor would you want to hear them. But what was a very interesting for me is over the last 30 years has been never-ending amounts of criticism of him, and no one has stepped up and pointed out all the good things that he did. And I was one of those who didn't step forward, and I should have. I will say that after he died, as I wrote, and it was a very contentious period in the Western Addition, I was the acting director for a while, and I received a phone call about 10 days after that from Supervisor Terry Francois. Terry Francois at the time was the only African-American supervisor, and he suggested that Justin had done so many good things that he really should have something suitable named for him. So there are, he's gone, there are a number of people still around, and you mentioned Supervisor or Dianne Feinstein. There are several others, and I would recommend that you ask the Recreation and Park Department to give it a little more consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak on item number 5? And a reminder, if we could quiet all cell phones in the chamber, please. Anybody else wish to speak on item number 5? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. And I, for those of you who have not read Mr. Evans' email, which he, I think, sent to every member of the board, I just want to thank him for sending it. And I also want to say, as time has gone by and people have been able to grapple with this issue, more complete histories are being written. This book just came out, which is what I quoted from. And for people who want to learn more about that period of San Francisco history, a brand new book, it literally just came out, called Designing San Francisco, Art, Land, and Urban Renewal in the City by the Bay by Allison Eisenberg, I think is a really good, nuanced historical account, and that's actually what's helped evolve my thinking. So this is really not about demonizing a complicated man and an unfortunate period of time. I mean, there's fascinating things in here, actually, about how maybe you remember him, of your colleagues from those times, Ron Kaufman, who was one of Mr. Herman's staff, actually, after a huge land assemblage deal in the northeast corner of the city, which today, by the way, every San Francisco voter would have protested vociferously, but in those days, in the 1960s, it was some courageous activists who, won the day, but led to Ron Kaufman's realization as a relatively young man that historic preservation of those industrial buildings on the Northeast waterfront was the right thing to do for not only his own economic future, but for the future of San Francisco. It's a great book. I commend it to you. This is really not about demonizing the person. It's, I think, about moving the city forward. So I wanted those words to be in the records of San Francisco. And I don't want it to just be about Justin Herman. It was about an entire movement that emanated out of the federal government, that San Francisco was by far and away not the only town that did it, but nonetheless, the impacts to communities that actually were really vibrant, robust communities that there are, if you will, survivors of that can speak to that. There's incredible photographs. Perhaps Mr. Johnson took some of them that reflect what the Fillmore looked like in those days, that reflected what the produce market that was on the northern waterfront looked like in those days. But there were many, many city officials, be they mayors or members of the Board of Supervisors, staff, and the public, who allowed it all to happen. And this has become synonymous with that name, but I'm being, I hope, a student of history in setting the record straight that Justin was, if I may call him by his first name, I was 7 years old in 1971 when he passed away, was no Robert Moses. So with that, colleagues, I would respectfully suggest that we send this to the full board.
Okay. Supervisor Peskin has made a motion with a positive recommendation. I assume. Okay. Motion by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. Okay, Madam Clerk, would you call item number 6?
Yes, item number 6 is an urgency ordinance approving an interim zoning moratorium on the approval of medical cannabis dispensaries for 45 days in accordance with California Government Code Section 65858.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. This item was sponsored by Supervisor Cohen, who has joined us in committee. Supervisor Cohen, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to join you in committee today to talk about item 6, which specifically has to do with a very hot topic of the cannabis moratorium that I proposed in late July. So, as you know, this is a 45 interim zoning moratorium on the approval of medical cannabis dispensaries in our city. And at this point, I want to also highlight that there's a distinction between medical grade cannabis and a recreation cannabis. The legislation that the state of California passed last year approved recreational cannabis. At this time right now in our city, the businesses that are set up are dealing in the space of medical cannabis. So I just wanted to highlight that to make sure that we've got our nomenclature and we've got the same baseline of understanding as to where we are. The existing regulatory framework for medical cannabis dispensaries is over a decade old. And while it's been more successful here in our jurisdiction in California, I think that it's outlived its usefulness and needs to be reconsidered. The proposed interim moratorium allows our city to take a pause and to evaluate the best way to regulate cannabis in San Francisco. And when I'm talking about the best way to regulate cannabis in San Francisco, that is a very hands-on discussion with those that are industry professionals, those that are service providers, those that are end users. This is a very wide tent, very comprehensive approach for outreach and gathering information. And quite frankly, it's also very daunting. We're talking about creating new regulations in a space that didn't currently exist. So among other things, the city is looking at how we can reevaluate our existing MCD regulations and how those regulations will interact with adult cannabis use as a result of the passage of Prop 64. New cannabis regulations New cannabis regulations will be informed by how we regulate adult cannabis retail locations, which is a series of policies we have yet to develop but need to do so by January 2018. The law that was passed in Prop 64 requires our state to have these laws in place by January 1st of 2018. So we as a city and county are working feverishly to comply with what the law dictated. We know a few things. We know various city departments, including the Planning Department, Public Health, and now our new Office of Cannabis, have been studying how to regulate the cannabis industry once it's legal for cannabis to be grown and to be sold for adult use as of January of 2018. We expect to consider these proposed regulations this fall. We do not know how many of the city's MCDs will convert to adult use by next year. But if the city gives priority or special processing to existing MCDs that want to convert to adult use, every MCD we approve from now on would be given that special consideration. So again, we don't know how many of the city's MCDs will be converted to adult use for next year. And I think there is a series of assumptions that have been erroneously made by those in the industry that believe that if they are up and operational in selling or in the space of medical grade cannabis, that it will be an automatic transfer. I'm here to tell you that that is not the case. We need to consider this as we look at current approvals, at the current approval process for MCDs. The city also does not currently have existing tools that are sufficient for regulating the operators of MCDs. And I have firsthand experience that of being the supervisor of a few operational MCDs that have caused a little bit of a hiccup in the social fabric as well as the safety of the Southeast neighborhoods. The Planning Commission has been the Planning Commission has been asking the city to provide them with better tools on how to regulate these MCDs. So given the upcoming changes to cannabis in California and the creation of the office of the new Office of Cannabis, I believe that it's prudent for us to take a pause and to reevaluate our current controls and how we can refine them to better serve patients as well as San Franciscans as a whole. And during this process, I've heard from many MCD applicants and members of the cannabis industry. I've heard loud and clear from folks that the proposed legislation may impact some of the pending applications in the pipeline. And I'm concerned and very sensitive to this concern. Specifically, we're talking about those who are planning to go before the Planning Commission in the next couple of months and have invested a considerable amount of time and resources into their pending applications and their budding new business. No pun intended. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just checking to make sure you guys are awake out there. So, in response to all this, what I am asking is fairly simple. I would like this committee to consider an amendment to exempt MCD applications that have a scheduled hearing date before the Planning Commission as of today. To be clear, this is not an exemption of all pending applications with the Planning or the Department of Public Health, but rather those that have a scheduled hearing date. I believe that this amendment solves for the concerns that I've heard through my partnership with Terrence Allen and the task force. This amendment solves for the concerns about the time and the cost that applicants have invested in obtaining its MCD application. It is also consistent with the recommendation that the Small Business Commission has provided to me. So, colleagues, you will find this amendment on page 6, lines 21 through 23, and we have a copy that we can circulate for you. Additionally, I would like to include additional amendments in the findings of the legislation. I understand the permitting scheme and regulations are still being developed, but I want to emphasize that addressing the disparities in the cannabis industry and recognizing communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the discriminatory drug policies, affectionately known as the war on drugs, it's a critical part of this conversation. I want to also highlight an important entity here in the city, the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission has been in consultation with the Office of Cannabis in their development of a report to help analyze these disparities. And and this report, and we as a Board of Supervisors should ensure that this report is considered in the creation of the MCD permitting framework. You'll also find this reflected in the new amendments and the new amended findings, which you can find in the legislation on page 4 through 5, beginning on line 19, and that's on page 4. So, colleagues, I am hopeful that you will be able to support the amendments to the legislation today. I want to offer up Dan Seidner from the Planning Department, who's here to answer questions, and I'm happy to make myself available to questions that you may have. As a side note, there's a few things I think that I want to highlight. First of all, some of you may be wondering, well, how many MCDs are we talking about? How many pending applications are out there? And I want to speak to that. Currently, there are 11 pending medicinal cannabis dispensary applications that have been submitted to the Planning Department. 4 have scheduled hearings. 4 of them, 4 out of 11. 3 of the 11 are conditional use applications, and 8 are discretionary review. So the other question is what exactly are the timelines that we're dealing with here? So if the legislation comes out of committee, and it comes out as a committee report, it will go to the Board of Supervisors. The board passes the legislation tomorrow. That then will start, let me back up. If it passes at the board tomorrow, the 45-day window would kick in when the mayor signs the legislation, which quite frankly, will be at the earliest of September 22nd. The mayor is currently traveling, and so there's no way for him to sign the legislation immediately. So this means that the moratorium could quite possibly expire as early as November 3rd with, that's it, at November 3rd. So I see Supervisor Tang has a request to speak, and then we'll address Supervisor Peskin. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. And I'm going to turn to my colleagues in a second. Both Supervisor Tang and Peskin wanted to speak. I just wanted to say a few words here in the beginning. I know that legislation and other controls around MCDs is tricky, certainly from a neighborhood and a district supervisor perspective. I've worked well with a number of dispensaries that have wanted to come into District 2, not so well with others. And understand that the discussions around this. I would just say, in principle, and I'll look forward to listening to these amendments and reading them here during committee. But however, the policies, generically speaking, of a moratorium is not something that I think is the best approach. We had a discussion around it, around housing in the Mission District. I didn't like it then for a lot of the reasons, and I don't like that approach to legislating, personally. But Supervisor Cohen, your amendments, I guess, grandfather relaxes it a little bit. Yes. So I look forward to hearing the discussion here. But I just want to say, on any issue, just moratoriums, generically speaking, is not something that I like to do and want to support, or making things more restrictive. I think we should tackle this legislatively. I get it. I know there's debate around this topic, and that's fine, and it's controversial, and certainly understand all of us what we all have to do representing our districts. But I just want to say on the outset, and I understand, Supervisor Cohen, that these amendments now are a little bit less restrictive, but on principle, it's not something that I like to do, and I think we should be tackling this legislatively, and quite frankly, 45 days. And I understand that might be for statutory reasons or otherwise that we're choosing 45 days, but I also think a 45-day moratorium as it relates to the way that we operate inside of, by law and otherwise is just a blip on the radar screen here. But with that, I want to turn it over to my colleagues, but I just want to be very transparent about how I think about just moratoriums in general. So with that, Supervisor Tang and then Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you. And I know this is a very complicated issue, and some of us maybe painted a certain way about how we feel about MCDs. But for me, I would just say, to be very honest, I think it really is important to have a pause on MCDs as we as a city are trying to figure out our regulations moving forward regarding recreational use. I do think it's very different in terms of the clientele that you're serving, the impacts to the neighborhood. And so to me, this isn't saying we're going to stop all of it. We are putting a pause while we very thoughtfully craft legislation in the city. So I do think that's really important. I want to thank Supervisor Cohen for being thoughtful about that. I do also want to thank some of the folks who actually have tried to help me understand more about the cannabis industry and taken me around to visit whether it's dispensaries or grow facilities. I think it is important for us to understand all perspectives, and I have certainly tried to do that. With that said, I do know that there are some MCDs that are approved through a conditional use authorization process, and so I wanted to add on to Supervisor Cohen's amendment so that proposed MCDs that are required to obtain CU authorization and for which a final determination on the CU authorization, including the resolution of any appeal, has not yet been made as of the effective date, they would also be subject to this ordinance. And this really stems from my desire from the planning department and the commission, to actually have taken a pause before we had on any approvals before we had come up as a city with formal legislation. So it really stems from that versus individual projects or so forth. So that is an amendment that I would like to tack on as Supervisor Cohen's amendment, and I think that there is justification given that in some neighborhoods we have asked for a CU authorization with the understanding that there's a higher threshold that we are asking for given some of the impacts that they would have in our neighborhoods. So colleagues, you'll see that on a separate, handout that I gave you on page 6, lines 8 through 12.
I've now got so many of these in front of me, I'm not sure whose is whose. I don't know if I have Supervisor Tang's amendments.
Mine. That's mine. Mm-hmm. So at this time, I'm going to let you have an opportunity to take a look at the language.
So I guess, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Peskin.
I was going to speak to some different issues, and I can do them in any which order, but as to Supervisor Tang's proposed amendment to Supervisor Cohen's, so what is the universe of pending applications that are required to obtain a CU for which a final determination, including the resolution of any appeal, has not yet been made? There's obviously the Noriega case. Is there anything else?
Supervisor Peskin, could you repeat that one more time? You're asking me what's in the pipeline?
Or to Supervisor Tang or to Mr. Sider.
I can read you a list of active planning or applications that have dates that are assigned. I think that may answer your question, Supervisor Peskin.
So I think the nuance is which ones are subject to mandatory discretionary review, which are covered in your 4, as I understand it, and Supervisor Tang's that says an MCD that needs a CU for which a final determination, including the resolution of any appeal, has not yet been made as of the effective date. So my question is, and by the way, just as a point of information, Mayor Lee is back, or at least he was back at 8 o'clock this morning. I saw him. But what is the universe of, other than the Noriega case, which we are all familiar with and is coming, we continue that to October the 3rd, I believe. What else is out there?
All right, so we have a CU schedule, it was opened on March 30th of 2017. The address is 2165 Irving. The hearing date is scheduled for October 12th of 2017. That's the only CU. I have...
August 21st? I'm sorry, what was that date?
I don't have the name of the business.
No, I'm sorry, the date. What was the date you
The
said?
hearing date?
Yeah?
It's October
Got it.
12th, 2017.
So that presumably is days away from the end of the expiration, 45-day expiration date.
Right, and I'm actually going to have staff bring you a list for everyone on this committee so you can see for yourself.
So while we're mulling that over, let me just offer some kind of more high-level general thoughts. And perhaps this is because the supervisor who was kind of leading on this issue left us and went and became part of our legislative delegation in Sacramento. But there's no question that this and every other municipality in the state of California has to figure this out as a local land use issue. And indeed, as Supervisor Cohen said, a decade ago, we did that with some success and some failure and some need to revise it with then Supervisor Mercarimi over a decade ago. And that landscape has clearly changed. And I am compelled when members of the Planning Commission who are quote-unquote progressive and quote-unquote moderate come to the board, and I've heard it from all of them, left, right, and center, that they want a timeout as this kind of new gold rush is happening and we don't have permanent controls in place. So while I share Chair Farrell's reluctance to do a interim moratorium, if you will, I do understand that there is a need to, have a uniform and equitable set of regulations, and I'm sensitive to that. I'm also worried that, and I don't know if Ms. Elliott, our new cannabis point person, is here or not, but I'm also sensitive to the fact that 45 days becomes 90 days, becomes 180 days, and I don't want to see that happen. So, I mean, if we're doing truly a short timeout and sending the sense of urgency to our planning staff and to Ms. Elliott and our new Office of Cannabis, I can go there, particularly with the amendments both to the findings and to the resolves that Supervisor Cohen has already proposed. But I am concerned with some of the findings in here that play into some of the age-old scare tactics and bizarre arcane logic that was used to justify prohibition for decades and decades since the hemp industry and reefer madness and what have you. And I think we can adequately establish the need for this moratorium by adding a little language under subsection 3 and then deleting subsections A and B related to crime and nuisance activity, which I find, how should I say it nicely, off-putting, and I mean no offense to anybody, but I would say that we might want to consider revising the findings so that Section 3, this is page 3, line 13, has the existing language. There's an immediate threat to the public health, safety, and welfare caused by the continued issuance of MCD permits. Insert, and I'll circulate this to you, supervisors, without uniform and equitable regulations for the granting of those permits. And strike findings A and B about security risks and nuisance activity and loitering and what have you. I think that shouldn't upset the city attorney, and then I would suggest that we take the rest of it and renumber B, C, D, E, and F and make them A, B, C, D, and E. And I will circulate those to you. But those were my bigger thoughts. I am now in receipt of the lists of what is subject to mandatory discretionary review and what is subject to CU. And it looks like...
Supervisor Peskin, if I can help you because you don't have the highlighted copy, I just wanted to get you the list. I can...
Yeah, but it looks like there's only one more that has a hearing date, which is the one that you said, 2165.
That's right.
I guess I would counter-propose friendly through the chair to Supervisor Tang that, I mean, given the days of difference, that anything with a hearing date goes forward, but I do understand, I mean, in the Noriega case, if we deny the CU, they would then fall into they don't have a hearing date, and if we approve the CU, we approve the CU. I mean, or if we don't grant the appeal or grant the appeal, however you want it, whatever terminology you want. So I'd kind of split the difference with you, but I'm not going to take it to the mat.
Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. I will definitely consider that. Perhaps we can, or if we are done with our discussion, we can go to public comment, and I will dwell on that for a moment.
Okay. Seeing there's no other discussion at the moment up here, I will open this up to public comment for item number 6. So anybody who wishes to speak on item number 6, everyone's going to have 2 minutes. Please come up first, and please line up against the far wall if you are not first up, and we will take everybody one at a time. Sir.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is David Goldman. I'm a over 40-year resident and homeowner in San Francisco. I am the current president of the San Francisco chapter of the Brownie Mary Democratic Club. I was the chair of the San Francisco chapter of Americans for Safe Access from 2008 to 2013. And I served on the Medical Cannabis Task Force from 2009 through 2011. I'm speaking to you today to oppose any moratorium. Since 2005, the Medical Cannabis Act, often called Article 33, has been successful in permitting the city government through the Planning Commission, Building Department, Health Department, and Mayor's Office of Disability of deciding which applicants merit getting a medical cannabis dispensary permit. Recently, the Planning Commission voted to support the notion of a moratorium, and yet subsequent to that vote, they allowed 2 new dispensaries who had no opposition to be permitted. In other words, the Planning Commission is doing its job. It's doing its job well. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The Planning Commission can easily discern good players from bad players, and I have been at hearings where the Planning Commission unanimously defeated several dispensaries, so it's clear that the city can handle it. We don't need this moratorium. The city is able to handle deciding which dispensaries applicants are good or bad players. And I would also add that there has been no evidence to show that dispensaries are bad for neighborhoods. Dispensaries are run by and for patients. I'm a medical cannabis patient. I don't go into neighborhoods and do bad things, and there is no record in the public record of dispensaries causing problems for neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Well, this is really fun here. No, I'm not pointing my finger at Supervisor Cohen or anything, or even at you, Ms. Supervisor Tang, because with this weed here, you get a big bang anyway. So I'm here trying to find out what in the hell is going on. You got the city and county in place already. You got your this guy named Alex, whatever his name is. He's drawing already $200,000 for his position as the candidacy guy. $200,000. Now, do you know what that means for an African-American black man that's in jail for what they've been doing and know how to make money do that? Do you know that the city's going to pay $200,000 for one person? If the city had to hire 5 of our African-Americans or something, you could have got a lot of people in the canopy. But anyway, you understand what I'm saying. Right now, I disapprove of Supervisor moratorium. I have a question. because she made fun of a little joke about pot, just like she made fun in another meeting about the pay-to-play situation. But that will stick with her for the rest of her career. But the deal is, I'm here in the city. I would like to do a new phrase and hear about all these crooked politicians. About pay-to-play, there might be pay-to-lay. Right now I'm finding out, is it a pay to the delay? Is somebody getting paid right here to delay? That's not a joke, that's a question. Because you got supervisors up here joking about it now. I'm wondering if they're alive trying to find out what are you trying to do and who are you doing it for? You have opposition against you about this. I don't know if you ever smoked marijuana or anything, but I have, and it calms me down. I had surgery. I know you don't want me to act crazy. Try to stop that, what we doing here. But my question is, the city and county, y'all paying people already for it.
What are you talking about?
Delay to pay? What's going on here in the city by the bay?
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Michael Cohen, and just a little bit of my history. I used to be on the board for the San Francisco chapter of Americans for Safe Access, and am presently on the board with the Brownie Mary Democratic Club here in San Francisco. I am opposed to against any moratorium against MCDs. The Planning Commission has been doing its job just fine. I think that the Planning Commission can weed out the good players from the bad players, and they've been very successful at doing that, and I don't see any reason why we would want to interfere with what they're doing. It's not needed. We don't need a moratorium. Any projects that are in the pipeline, I feel should be completed. They should be heard as scheduled before the Planning Commission. A moratorium would cause less access, less competition, and less choice, as well as more inconvenience for medical cannabis patients. This is not good for patients. It's not good for patients who need to purchase cannabis from dispensaries, nor is it good for aspiring small businesses. San Francisco can continue to enact smart regulation of cannabis without enacting a moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Honorable Supervisors, thank you for your consideration today. I'm just a bit nervous, so I certainly hope you'll be understanding if I stutter just a bit. I would like to ask you, Supervisor Cohen, firstly to withdraw your motion, if that is all possible. I don't know the procedures. And then secondly, for your board to reject this matter. Firstly, because I believe it to be good public policy to not proceed in this fashion. I think that should govern our perspectives here. And secondly, I would like to speak today on behalf of the pre-existing Prop 215 compliant persons, many of whom you met, Supervisor, when you went to Humboldt County. They look to San Francisco for vision and leadership on this. This moratorium, Supervisor Peskin, would place you in the ranks of Fresno, Bakersfield, Riverside, Orange County, Anaheim, places that have embodied the wrong stance on the war on drugs, one that is fundamentally discriminatory. From the North Coast all the way down to San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara, the pre-existing compliant Prop 215 persons who I believe have a seat at the table, especially in considerations of social justice and equity, will be dismayed by this. It will have a chilling effect on their hope, just as the Plaza matter you reviewed earlier has a chilling effect on the hope of so many persons. I ask you to consider today that these people have not yet been included at the table, and that symbolically, also in fact, this will alienate those persons, and they will not see your supervisorial body in this city as a place of hope, as the fountainhead of this change that began in 1996, but the place where their dreams of inclusion in San Francisco met their end on the headlines from Humboldt to Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Ben Blyman, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the California Music and Culture Association. We support nightlife in San Francisco and especially the responsible and social consumption of alcohol and cannabis. We recognize the need for San Francisco's medical and adult use cannabis regulations to be thoroughly analyzed and improved given the coming state licensing regime, but the proposed moratorium will not further this goal. It will in fact hurt the legal cannabis market that is developing in San Francisco, hurt the patients who depend on medical cannabis, and have potentially far-reaching effects on San Francisco's tourism sector. If this moratorium is enacted, even for only the minimum 45 days, which is anything but certain, the ability of the new dispensaries to apply for and receive local permits and state licenses will be delayed, putting their operations at risk. Existing MCD operators and well-capitalized applicants will survive the moratorium, but small MCD applicants who cannot shoulder the added cost of delay will be seriously jeopardized. Why should the city advantage wealthy interests at the expense of local applicants who are hoping for an opportunity in the legal cannabis market? Allowing more legal medical dispensaries reduces the likelihood that patients and adult users will turn to the illicit market. More lawful MCDs in San Francisco likely means less criminal activity in San Francisco. It is also our position that the proposed moratorium will adversely impact San Francisco's tourism industry. Tourists coming to the city in 2018 are going to expect safe access to adult use cannabis once it is legal in California. For a short perspective, 49% of the state's visitors to Colorado were influenced by legal cannabis, and $100 million was spent by tourists in Colorado in the first year. Before considering any moratorium, we strongly encourage the Board of Supervisors to undertake an economic impact report to determine its effect. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Joanne Hillary, and I'm a cannabis patient as well as a partner in one of the pipeline dispensaries, Nug Medical Dispensary on Bryant. Thank you for letting me speak today on something that means a great deal to me. One of the arguments for this ban seems to come from the idea that patients are fully served by the current number of dispensaries. This is just simply not true. And halting the process even for 45 days and likely longer is not the answer. It would hurt patients and devastate small businesses and those who've been working for years to join the space legally. What we need to do is work together and collectively address concerns with informed and educated solutions. Medical dispensaries have been shown to reduce crime and improve neighborhoods. And most important, they've improved patients' lives. I am one of those people. I'm not a recreational user. I am someone who seriously injured my back and could not take the opioids available for the pain. Medical cannabis is the reason I'm able to avoid surgery. The experience led me to stand in front of you today. I wanted to bring my experience to the medical cannabis industry because of all of this. This moratorium will only add more confusion and mistrust about a topic that has been misrepresented for far too long. Please do the right thing for the patients like me. I respectfully urge you to oppose this moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you, members. My name is Anthony Bowles. I am a current member of the San Francisco chapter of Americans for Safe Access. I just wanted to say that we respectfully oppose the moratorium. We think that a moratorium is unnecessary. It'll only exacerbate the equity concerns, actually, and not make them better. So it also is going to hurt small entrepreneurs and limit convenient access to patients. So many of the existing pipeline applicants represent the type of equity interests the city should be ensuring will have a place, and we respectfully request that you reject the moratorium. I also question the concerns surrounding MCDs that are properly regulated. They have been shown to actually reduce crime and help clean up surrounding areas. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Dee Dee Workman speaking on behalf of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is on record as supporting both the medical cannabis industry as well as the voter-approved state measure that legalizes cannabis sales for adult use beginning this January. The cannabis industry will be an economic driver in the city. across California and in other states throughout the country, producing new jobs as well as tax revenues that will support public infrastructure, social services, and civic programs. We should be doing everything we can to continue the momentum of this growing industry. A moratorium on approval of MCDs, which may extend beyond 45 days, is unnecessary and could set the city back in its efforts to establish protocols and oversight of the cannabis industry here in San Francisco. It's important that the Planning Commission continue to review and rule on MCD permit applications in the course of setting up the city's new Office of Cannabis. Those projects already in the pipeline should have the opportunity to move ahead, and we do appreciate Supervisor Cohen's proposed amendment to exempt projects that have scheduled hearings at the Planning Commission. San Francisco can proceed effectively and expeditiously with setting up management systems for the cannabis industry without putting a moratorium in place. The San Francisco Chamber of Commerce urges you to oppose this moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Johnny Delaplane. I represent the San Francisco Cannabis Retailers Alliance. We're a new trade group that is the voice of cannabis retail here in the city. I'm also a pipeline MCD applicant in Supervisor Cohen's district. So I'd like to say thank you to Supervisor Cohen for the amendment for the carve-out. And that's a step in the right direction, but my membership, we're not all calendared. And some of our applicants, they're African-American residents from the Bayview. They're Asian Pacific Islanders. There's a really broad range of people, and we're almost all local San Francisco people. And we're not big out-of-state operators with vast financial resources that can get over the hump of a moratorium. We're just small local guys trying to make it work. And, often we've been in process for a year or more. Personally, I came to cannabis through Crohn's disease, and I use cannabis on a daily basis to control the inflammation for my Crohn's disease. It's helped me live a life where you can't really tell that I'm sick. And, we share a lot of these same concerns, and I absolutely understand, Supervisor Cohen, where you're coming from with this. But the city, no medical dispensary will become an adult use dispensary without undergoing the process the city is going to make. So in that, spirit, you guys hold all the cards. You can call it however you want it, and we will follow through. And that's why, respectfully, we don't feel a moratorium is necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Sarah Schrader. I was born, raised, and educated here in San Francisco. I graduated from San Francisco City College at the age of 18, and 3 months later got into a car accident and ended up getting a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. With trying over 30 meds and seeing over 30 different types of medical professionals, this has been a life changer for me to have access for cannabis in San Francisco. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I've been appointed to hold the public policy seat on the San Francisco State Cannabis Legalization Task Force, and I've been active with the grassroots cannabis organizing since 2002 with Americans for Safe Access. Today, we're here concerned that, I'm here today concerned about the moratorium, and I've seen a lot of urgency ordinances passed in the past when I didn't see the urgency that went with it. I have a concern that the city may fear that we have way too many dispensaries rushing in, or that our current dispensaries are not prepared for recreational, but I can assure you that each of these permits takes a year, 2, sometimes more. So having a 45-day moratorium doesn't seem like it's going to have a huge impact when to stop these fears that you guys are concerned about. I also think that the State Legalization Task Force was put together to give you guys some really good recommendations, and those recommendations include having all dispensaries go through a permitting process, even if they're open already. We'd like to give those people priority. Instead, I urge you today to consider adopting Planning Department recommendations that were drafted in March of 2014. Those really gave us some good sense of the things that we'd like to see changed here in San Francisco cannabis law, as well as the 25 pages of recommendations that came out from the task force last year. I would also like to say that related to equity in San Francisco, there's no one that I want to see re-permitted more than the people that were forced to close due to federal interference, either raid or the landlord letters. So to cut out this process and cut them out of this process when they may not have locations or permits submitted seems very unfair for people that have been trying to play by San Francisco's rules the whole time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me speak today. My name is Quentin Platt. I'm also a project sponsor for a project in Supervisor Cohen's district, and I also want to thank her for taking the time to listen to everybody that's reached out, as well as to all the Board of Supervisors members, to hear feedback from the existing businesses in the community, from those that want to come into the community, and also from the people that are most important, which are the patients. I'll just lend a little bit of a personal note on my journey. The process for me to get into this industry didn't start with me submitting my application to the Department of Public Health. It started with me making a decision on how I wanted the rest of my life to look and whether I was going to leave my job and move into an industry in which I thought I could help. This was many months before I was able to actually submit an application. This was actually more than a year before I was able to submit an application. So I do want to speak up on behalf of the people that may not even have an application in the pipeline yet, as well as those who have just entered their applications into the pipeline. For the process actually can be a very long process, and I appreciate the honoring of the people that have a scheduled hearing date, but I'd like to advocate on the behalf of those who don't have a scheduled hearing date, and then just respectfully oppose the moratorium in general in an effort to be sure that more people are allowed to enter this industry and follow the processes that have been outlined by the city and not be affected by an assumption of whether something may pass or not. One last personal note, certainly with respect to recreational, we had no assumption that we would be moving into the recreational market when we made the decision to enter the industry. We just had an assumption that we would be able to follow the process that had been outlined by the city and had been followed for the previous 10 years. So I want to say thank you again, and I respectfully urge you to vote no against the moratorium.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Douglas Evans. I'm here on behalf of myself as a long-term resident of San Francisco. California led the nation in legalizing medical cannabis. We have since that has led to an important and fast-growing industry. I think I've since witnessed other states take the lead, and I believe one reason has been because of unnecessary local government interference. San Francisco has always been a city of revolution. The prohibition will eventually end nationally. I want to see our state and our city in the forefront of that new revolution, not as a roadblock in the way. Please do not approve this moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Dominic Rapoli, and I think I've had the pleasure of speaking with all of you about cannabis, except maybe for Supervisor Tang. I am here today as a patient advocate with the Brownie Mary Democratic Club, and I oppose the moratorium. I have an email from Douglas Obana, who is currently the person who's managing the current cannabis system, and I would like to note that in the email, he gave me a number of 29 applications that are currently going through the process. I understand Supervisor Cohen mentioned that there are 5 currently that have dates for their hearings, but there are still 29, or would leave over 20 applications that don't have a hearing date but have gone through certain processes, had certain departments check out their buildings, had paid certain fines, and by putting the moratorium in place, you're only discouraging these local San Franciscans, many of them who are minority entrepreneurs. Some of them are trying to save their third-generation building that their families owned in San Francisco and renovating it. By putting the moratorium into place, I believe you encourage individuals with lots of money to spare over the long period of time to get an MCD permit, rather than the individuals that we're trying to target and provide business opportunities to local San Franciscans. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Wilson Chu. I am the president of the Chinese American Club, and I'm speaking in support of the moratorium. We have been reaching out, we have been assisting a lot of the neighborhood groups in expressing their voice in front of planning as well as in front of the appeal process. And it is to my experience that I think that that we could do better in terms of the planning current planning regulations in regards to MCD, and as well as planning for the transition into a recreational use. As an example, when we had gone in front of the appeals for 2505 Bayshore, there was a child care center that had operated for 2 days. And just because it operated 2 days and not 5, 6, or 7, it wasn't considered a child care center. And also in regards to some of the other centers where they service children up to the age of 6, those are also not considered within the green zone. I think some residences within the neighborhoods are concerned about those issues. I think these are some of the things that we can do better in terms of planning. I think these are some of the things that we can improve on in order to satisfy both the industry as well as the residences within the neighborhood. I would urge this committee to support the moratorium.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
No dispensary should be where neighbors don't want them, of course. I'm Charlie Pappas. I'm Vice Chairman, Berkeley Cannabis Commission. I co-founded Divinity Tree Patients Wellness Co-op. We were the first dispensary closed by the feds, and there were at least 10 others closed. If this moratorium goes into effect, we have not been able to find a place yet, and that'll affect those people. I'd like to have some respect for the moratorium, but I have none. It's an excuse. It's an excuse to have less dispensaries in your district. That's the only possible reason for it. The other three, Aaron and Mike, I've met you in the hallway, and I appreciate Ms. Tang's opposition to dispensaries that didn't belong in her neighborhood, that weren't appropriate. But you people, you three should not approve, send this to the city council when you don't have dispensaries in your neighborhood. First of all, there's not enough medical cannabis dispensaries in Berkeley. There needs to be more. There needs to be one in every district where it's appropriate. Let me tell you another fact about the state. The state is encouraging, local municipalities to make regulations because you need both permits. As far as Lori Jackson has said in my conversation with her, there will be no, recreational use of medical cannabis. Recreational state regulated recreational use of cannabis, for at least 6 months, not January 1st. This is a, I started a dispensary in San Francisco because of moratoriums in Oakland and Berkeley that were ridiculous. That were, again, solutions in search of a problem. That's what this moratorium is. Please do not approve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Duque. Hi. I saw a lot of familiar faces from the task force. I think, good afternoon. How are you? We have been to the task force for so long. I come here to support Supervisor's memorandum because I think this is very, very important. I represent a lot of the community member, and I don't think our voices are heard. And I have been urging, the task force to have a town hall meeting with us, at least, hear our voices. We are in crisis. The reason why I say that is that the community cannot move out. The community are scared. I'm scared too. I don't know what will happen to us. We cannot move out of the city. Where can we go? I think this is very, very important that the supervisor make the very best situations for us, not just, to hear one side. And, the best for the community. You are like the father and mother. We depend a lot on you to protect us. The community are scarce. You need to listen to us, have more town hall meeting to educate us, to hear us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak on item number 6? Okay, seeing none, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Cohen?
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone that took the time out to come. Some traveled from other parts of the Bay Area to come and participate in this conversation, and which is frankly an ongoing conversation. This is not the ending, and this is nor is this actually the beginning of the conversation. And many of you that came to public comment don't know me, don't know very much about my my philosophies or my views when it comes to the cannabis community. I have supported projects that have made sense, that are up and operational in the in my district, and I've certainly have not supported projects that didn't make sense and didn't support. So I actually voted for the legislation in support, and I consider myself to be a pro-cannabis person. But above all else, I am a legislator, and it's my job to develop policies, sound policies that are going to withstand the test of time. And these policies that we are working on and that we're creating are going to be dynamic and fluid, which means that they will be, what we are seeing today will not be, hopefully, the same policies that we will be seeing in 20 years' time, that we will be able to establish a foundation to where, as industry grows, as community grows, as things ebb and flow and changes happen, that the legislation also is able to reflect that. And, I'm really saddened to hear that there is fear on both sides, people that want the cannabis industry to continue to grow and believe that this moratorium is a tool to thwart their ability to grow their business. And I'm saddened to hear that people are afraid of what the effects will be with the MCDs coming into the community. And as a policymaker, I'm listening because I'm looking to find a way that will cut through this noise and create something that is of balance. And I'm listening to this conversation, and I'm actually reminded of how airplanes take off. Airplanes, they take off and they go up. They reach a certain cruising altitude, and when they want to continue to go up, they have to go down first before they can gain enough momentum to go up. And so a pause on the moratorium is not a stop. This is not something to be fearful of. Quite frankly, there are other legislative tools that we can use to really send chills down the industry's spine. And this is not a threat. This is something to put it into perspective. We have an opportunity early on in this conversation to do it right. I've chaired the Land Use Committee, and I've sit on this Land Use Committee for 7 years. I know the land use issues and how things are done. And frankly, things are done piecemeal in this city, piecing things together. When there's a problem, there's a stopgap. We'll do this, we'll do that. We'll bring it to the voters. We won't take it to the voters. And I'm not trying to do it that way. I'm trying to create enough space so that a thoughtful piece of legislation will be in place that would help everyone. Hindsight could be every member of the Board of Supervisors could begin to introduce legislation to put a cap. Now that, in my opinion, is more harmful to the industry and more harmful when it comes to citywide policy. So I want you to pick things and keep it in perspective of what we're trying to do here. We are, like I said earlier, working very hard to create these the regulations to put them in place, not later at the end of the year, but as soon as possible, so that there is certainty when it comes to those that are evaluating a business opportunity. It's not my job to think about how much tourist dollars are going to be lost. It's my job to think about the opportunity, the safety, the security of the tourists that are going to be coming into the neighborhoods, the quality of the product that they're going to be receiving. Is it going to be consistent? Dosage amounts. I mean, there are real things that we need to be paying attention to. And I think that this fear of the moratorium really comes from a place of, one, not understanding who I am and how I come to this conversation, and two, just purely reactionary. Moratorium, and people get absurd, get afraid. And part of this discussion is we need to just take an opportunity to breathe. Now, we could also direct the planning department to stop accepting applications. We could also direct the health department to stop accepting application. But I think that that's too far on the other side of the spectrum. That's the wrong approach as well. The purpose of the moratorium is not to discourage people, not to create fear or create doubt. San Francisco has been an industry leader on this particular topic for decades. You think we're going to all of a sudden stop? I'm a native San Franciscan. These values that you espoused at public comment are embedded in me. I live them, and I actually protect them too. When you go outside of San Francisco County into Riverside, into Orange County, and some of the more conservative counties. So I'm not your enemy. Nobody on this body is your enemy. We really want to create a dynamic that is fair and that is balanced for everyone. Those businesses that were shut down by federal raids most certainly should have an opportunity to re-engage and become legal. The businesses that are operating illegally, we want you to be able to operate legally. But how do we can't just, it has to be more than just a want and desire in our heart. We have to think. We have to think critically and analyze and come up with policies. And frankly, we're catching up. We're catching up. And so in an effort to catch up, we are asking for some time. I want to speak to the concerns about less access. There are 35 businesses in the city and county of San Francisco alone that are serving patients. 35. Spattered all across the city, and yes, some of them, most of them are clustered. Why? Because of poor planning process. Because why? Perhaps somebody was too afraid to say, hey, time out. We need to really think this through. Instead, they kind of just go along to get along, piecemeal, and put shit together and think that it's going to be okay and that we're going to be able to get through this. It's catching up to us. I am asking for an opportunity so that we can get it right. Patients will be able to continue to get the medicine that they need. We're not stopping that. No desire to stop that. And one speaker talked about the vision and leadership of San Francisco. We will continue to have vision and leadership, but it's leadership that you need in order to stand up to face the opposition, to stand up to go against the tide. You think it's easy to sit up here and have all these lies spewed, insults given, lack of understanding? To be fair, I understand. Government hasn't been the most trustworthy. But I'm here to say that we're trying to turn over a new leaf, have a new approach to how we're doing business here in San Francisco. So, colleagues, I hope that you will accept the amendments that I have proposed. I ask for your support. I think the amendments are fair. I've listened, and I have created some amendments that respond to your concerns. And that's how I am. That is how I operate. And that's how I will continue to operate from this day and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. So, colleagues, unless any comments right now, I think there are a set of amendments that we might be considering. Supervisor Peskin, I think there are a number of amendments we may be discussing. First, there's some amendments to some findings that I know Supervisor Peskin, you and Supervisor Cohen have gone back and forth on.
I'm fine with the proposed amendments that Supervisor Peskin is proposing.
Okay, do you want to reiterate the line items?
Yes.
So we're very clear and make a separate motion. Let's take these one by one.
I have passed them out, and let me reiterate somewhere in the stack, which was on page 3, line 13, to add to subsection 3. So the entire sentence would now read, there is an immediate threat to the public health, safety, and welfare caused by the continued issuance of MCD permits, insert without uniform and equitable regulations for the granting of those permits, and then strike all of the reactionary language in A and B, and then renumber all of the findings, or re-letter all of the findings accordingly, including the findings proposed by Supervisor Cohen, which I will move as a member of the committee, the finding directing the Office of Cannabis in consultation with the Human Rights Commission, as previously discussed, and the finding that the city is considering different possible approaches to permitting MCDs. So I would move those. I would also move Supervisor Cohen's.
Can we take these one at a time?
Yes,
All
sir.
right. So motion by Supervisor Peskin on the findings to our clerk. Are we clear on those?
Yes.
Okay. And can we take those without objection? Okay. So moved. Supervisor Peskin.
And then I am fine, and as a member of the committee, am happy to move Supervisor Cohen's provision on page 6 at line 5 that would provide that any scheduled mandatory discretionary review hearing as of today, September 11th, would not be covered. And then I will defer to Supervisor Tang on her language that she proposed in subsection B in section 2.
Okay, so Supervisor Peskin, so that motion regarding Supervisor Cohen, and just to be clear on this amendment here, this is basically the grandfathering, if you will, of ones that have already been scheduled.
Yes.
Okay, can we take that without objection?
And just the slight nuance there is that they are mandatory discretionary reviews that have already been scheduled. There is one conditional use that has already been scheduled,
Right, so
which we can discuss.
Supervisor Tang will discuss in a second. Okay, Supervisor Peskin has made a motion. We can take that with objection. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. So I will still propose my CU exception here, which follows what Supervisor Cohen had made as amendment, but I'm happy to take that as a roll call vote.
Okay, we can do that. Supervisor Tang to make a motion then on her CU. We can take a roll call vote on that.
On the motion to amend the legislation as stated by Supervisor Tang, Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Chair Farrell?
Nope.
There are 2 ayes and 1 no with Chair Farrell in dissent.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, so colleagues, I think unless there are any other comments here, I think we've gone through the motions or the potential amendments here. And we will, Supervisor Peskin?
I just had one question. Is there anything Mr. Sider from Planning would like to add to this discussion? Okay.
Okay, got it. And I would just say we've made some amendments. I want to respect the amendments we made today. As I reiterated earlier, the notion of moratoriums is not something that I favor here legislatively. I do appreciate the dialogue that we've had today. What I would like to do, colleagues, unless there's objections, I'm going to reserve my vote for tomorrow and think about this again. I'm inclined not to support moratoriums, but I'd be happy to send this out without committee, without recommendation today as amended, and support that unless there's a preference to do it with recommendation.
As a committee report?
Sure, we can do as a committee report. So, motion by Supervisor Tang?
So moved.
Okay, and we can take that without objection. Okay, Madam Clerk, would you, we're going to take a vote, go back to item number 5. I'd like to entertain a motion, colleagues, to rescind the vote on item number 5.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Peskin. Can we take that without objection? So moved. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back on item number 5. Board President Leonard Breed is here and wanted to make an amendment, so we've rescinded the vote. Supervisor Breed, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and thank you, colleagues, for taking this opportunity to give me a shot at talking quickly about this item. I know that you are finished with all of the business, and so I'd be as quick as I possibly can. There we go with the amendment. Okay. So, as many of you know, I was born and raised in the Western Addition, and the fact that the person who is most notorious for destroying it has anything named after him in the city and county of San Francisco is something that I think is important that we as a city change. And so I appreciate Supervisor Peskin, who District Justin Herman Plaza is located in, working with us to try and come up with a solution. And this solution of removing the name altogether is the first step in trying to do something that I think will be significant for the community, especially those who have been impacted by this decision. I won't go into the history and the details today, which we know there is a lengthy history of what not to do when it comes to government and redevelopment and trying to change a community. But needless to say, as we look at this resolution and we look at some of the findings in this resolution, sadly, under blighted communities, non-white was one of the listed conditions of defining that. And so clearly we made a lot of mistakes, and the director of this department was at the head of those mistakes, and I think is what caused what we know today, which is a destruction and a displacement of a significant, thriving African American and Japanese American community, estimated to be over 14 to 30,000 residents who have been displaced as of the work under his leadership. And this is why it's so vital that we make this change. And I want to say that, this is just the first step. We are changing the name. We're removing the name. But to determine what that name might be is a completely separate process. I've heard so many amazing people who have a place here in history in San Francisco that have been mentioned, and that process will be developed at a later time. But in the meantime, I do think it's important that we move forward with the removal of Justin Herman. And thank you, Supervisor Peskin, again, for your leadership on this. And so, colleagues, with that, my proposed amendment, which I work with the city attorney to develop, the work that I did a couple years ago to find out the cost to make this change, as I know Supervisor Peskin mentioned earlier, was $5,200. I do think that the last whereas clause on page 2, line 15, this is where this particular whereas clause should go. Whereas according to the Recreation and Park Department officials, the estimated cost to change the name of Justin Herman Plaza is $5,200, which includes replacing 2 signs bearing the name of the plaza, and it could be paid for from the department's materials and supplies budget. And then goes into the resolve. So that's my proposed amendment, because I know this is urging Rec and Park to do this particular matter, and I just want to remind them of what they said in 2014 of how something as simple as $5,200 could make something like this possible. So I just wanted to include that language in the resolution to make sure we move forward with this without any complications or any delays. And with that, I'd ask my colleagues to move this amendment forward, and thank you so much for your support of this resolution.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. What's that? Thank you very much. We don't even need to rescind that because that was technically not done appropriately. So we're going to go first to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on that item? Public comment is now closed. Supervisor Peskin, you want to move that amendment and the underlying item is amended?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. All right, Madam Clerk, any other business in front of us today?
There's no further business.
All right, thanks everybody. We're adjourned.